Now we're going to talk about two vocabulary terms that a lot of people get confused. In fact, when I took this class, my accounting professor did not really know the difference between deferrals and accruals, and I had to explain it to the professor. So I will warn you that this is kind of difficult for some people, and it's not super critical. What is critical about this chapter is that you understand why we do adjustments like prepaid rent and office supplies. So let's discuss the difference between deferrals and accruals. In a deferral transaction, the cash part of the transaction happens first, then later the adjusting entry happens. For example, prepaid rent is a deferral. How do we know that? Well, first, the transaction is you pay for the rent ahead of time. And when you pay for rent, cash is being affected. And then later, the adjustment happens. And remember, adjustments never involve cash. So in the adjustment, rent expense increases and prepaid rent decreases. So here's a hint about deferrals. It depends when the cash transaction happens. So cash, which starts with the letter C, comes before the letter D, which is a deferral. So cash comes first in the alphabet. So C comes before D in the alphabet. Therefore, the cash, C, the cash transaction comes before the adjusting entry. See up above, the first transaction, you pay for the prepaid rent, so that's the cash portion. And then later, at the end of the month, you do the adjustment to show how much of the prepaid rent you've used up. Accruals are just the opposite. In an accrual, the adjusting entry happens first, then later the cash transaction is recorded. For example, and we're going to learn about these employee salary adjustments in a couple of videos. For example, you owe employees salary at the end of the year, but they won't be paid until next year. This is an accrual. Why? Because the first transaction is the adjustment. The adjusting entry, which we'll find out in a couple of videos, is recorded first at the end of the year. For example, you will increase salary expense and then also increase salary payable because the end of the year usually does not fall on payday. Therefore, you will owe the employees some salary. So again, the first transaction, the adjusting entry happens at the end of the accounting period. And then later, the cash portion happens. For example, in this example about salaries, later when the employees are paid, the cash transaction occurs. In other words, you pay the employees. The salary payable decreases and then the cash decreases. So my hint for remembering when cash occurs for accruals, A, which stands for accrual, comes before C, which is cash in the alphabet. A becomes before C. Therefore, the adjusting entry, A, happens first. Then the cash transaction, C, comes later. Again, if this is super confusing to you, don't worry about it so much. In your advanced accounting classes, they'll get more into this. But just remember, for this chapter, what you really need to understand is why we are doing the adjusting entries, such as adjusting for prepaid rent used and adjusting for office supplies used.